Mr. Johnson of Georgia. Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 189 and the nays are 235. The motion is not adopted. The question is on the passage of the bill. Those in favor of adopting the bill say aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
Purposes the
I
gentleman.
ask for the
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey
I
rise?
ask for the yeas and nays, Mr. Speaker.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. The question is on the adoption of the bill. This is a 5-minute vote.
The House is now voting on final passage of this measure restricting activities of the National Labor Relations Board. This is a 5-minute vote, and this is the final vote for the House for this week. Legislative work will resume on Tuesday. By the way, you can see Speaker Boehner's speech on jobs live right now on our website, cspan.org. Over in the Senate, senators are offering general speeches right now. A little bit later, they'll continue working on trade restrictions against Myanmar, also known as Burma. Majority Leader Reid has changed that bill, including emergency disaster assistance funding. $6 to $7 billion will go to communities recently affected by Hurricane Irene and other natural disasters. Also, we could see in the Senate today legislation extending programs and funding provisions for the Federal Aviation Administration, along with some surface transportation provisions. Majority Leader Reid saying that he'd like to finish work on that bill before current FAA authorization expires tomorrow.
The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise? Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring of the Majority Leader the schedule for the week to come.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield to the Majority Leader, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Cantor.
I thank the gentleman from Maryland, the Democratic whip, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet at noon in pro forma session. On Tuesday, the House will meet at noon for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and noon for legislative business. On Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. Last votes of the week are expected no later than 3 p.m. on Friday. The House will consider a few bills under suspension of the rules on Tuesday and possibly Wednesday. A complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business tomorrow afternoon. The House will also consider a short-term continuing resolution to fund the government, and members are advised that the rule debate for that measure may take place on Tuesday. I do not expect the resolution itself, however, to be debated until Wednesday. Finally, we will take up H.R. 1705, the Bipartisan Transparency and Regulatory Analysis of Impacts on the Nation, otherwise known as TRAIN Act, which will measure the full consequences of regulations on job creation, and in particular, the utility MACT and cross-state air pollution rules. If any additional legislation is added to next week's schedule, it will be announced by the close of business tomorrow. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his information. I note that he has indicated the CR will be considered sometime next week, either Tuesday, but most likely on Wednesday. I want to ask him about, it's my understanding that the supplemental for emergency requirements of FEMA will be included in the CR. Is that accurate?
I'd say to the gentleman that what will be in the CR is the budgeted amount for all of fiscal year 2012, which is $2.65 billion, will be in the CR front-loaded. In other words, the agency will have access to all of those funds prior to the expiration of the CR November 18th. In addition to that, we have, as the gentleman knows, funded out of this House the emergency supplemental, which was $1 billion, more than that which the agency had requested, all of which was offset. That, too, will be in the CR.
I thank the gentleman. When you say all of that has been offset, it is my understanding that, in fact, in the CR for 2011, not for 12, but for 2011, that there is a $1.5 billion offset included. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate.
And it's further my understanding that that offset, which is unusual in that, as the gentleman knows, during the Bush administration, as happens, we have natural disasters and emergencies, hurricanes, floods, or even earthquakes that require local governments and local agencies and individuals to respond, and we have responded to them with assistance. But 8 times that we did that during the Bush administration, we did not offset it. We did not offset it on the theory that this was an emergency that occurred that was unplanned for, and that we would, in fact, obviously pay for it, but pay for it in subsequent years. It's my understanding that the offset that is being considered is $1.5 billion from the Advanced Vehicle Technology Fund. The problem with that, as I see it, we are talking about creating jobs. The President's presented a jobs bill. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But that the fund that is in question to date has created 39,000 jobs, and the loan applications in progress are projected to create 50 or 60,000 additional jobs. Therefore, if we use this as an offset, which would set a precedent, although I understand that precedent's not being followed for 2012, What we are doing, in my view, Mr. Leader, is undermining a specific item in the current scheme of things that is, in fact, creating jobs. As I said, 39,000 jobs with the loan applications that are in progress now expected to create an additional 50 to 60,000 jobs, that we undermine that effort. Frankly, on our side, we would hope that we could return to what is precedent, and that is, in an emergency, respond with emergency funding, as we did throughout the Bush administration, not with the concept that we wouldn't pay for it. You and I both agree that paying for this is critically important, and that, in fact, I think you and I are both of the opinion that hopefully the Committee of 12 set up to look at how we get our finances back in line with our revenues and expenditures, that needs to be done. But certainly this is a new precedent, and unfortunately it appears that you have targeted, I don't mean you personally, but the CR would target a particular item that is exactly what we want to do, and that is creating jobs. Would the gentleman like to comment on that?
Sure, I do.
Yield to my friend.
I do, and I know that, Mr. Speaker, I know the gentleman is committed to paying for what we spend, and he, if anyone, would put as a priority that we ought to act accordingly. And I find it somewhat ironic that the gentleman is defending what occurred during the Bush administration, as I will posit what occurred during the Clinton administration, because President Clinton, under his administration, actually signed 4 separate supplementals that were offset, including flooding and the Oklahoma City bombing. So it is, the gentleman is correct, there's precedent on either side. I think he would agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that now is the time for us to begin to really put forth a concerted effort to act responsibly, not just say we're going to act responsibly and attempt to offlay the obligation to the Joint Select Committee. We have an opportunity to do so now. And the gentleman refers to the offset that some on his side have raised as an objection. I would say to the gentleman, the facts are there's currently $4 billion in unobligated budget authority remaining under the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program, and this so-called pay-for just rescinds $1.5 billion of that total, and the program will have remaining in it $2.5 billion. And I think it's worthy of note, Mr. Speaker, that this money has been laying around since September 30th, 2008. That is 3 years. So I don't think, Mr. Speaker, that anyone is intending to do anything damaging to potential job creation here. What we're trying to do is finally face facts. We, in this body, in this town, must stop the federal government from continuing to spend money it doesn't have. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Of course, when the money the government doesn't have, as you know, the revenues are at the lowest point they've been in some 6 decades in America. On one hand, because we are not collecting revenue, and on the other hand, because people don't have money in their pockets to pay revenues. They're not working. Therefore, they're not paying taxes. And therefore, revenues are down for those 2 reasons. I would say to my friend that it's my understanding that the account that you have targeted has some $3.9 billion in pending requests, which are the items that would lead to 50 to 60,000 new jobs. Now, at a time when we're not creating sufficient jobs for our people, let's assume, for the sake of argument, you want to offset this money. You and I both agree it ought to be paid for. The question is, when do you pay for it? Do we pay for it right now? The fact of the matter is, if you target this particular fund, you are targeting a fund which has demonstrably grown jobs in America. Some 39,000 jobs have been created as a result of loans out of this fund. There are $3.9 billion. You indicate there is still money in the account. You're absolutely right on that. But there are pending requests, again, which would result in 50 or to 60,000 new jobs, which would be revenue creation for the federal government. So, in fact, it appears that we may be cutting off our nose to spite our face here, and I would urge the gentleman to perhaps revisit this. The gentleman mentioned the Clinton administration. As the gentleman will well recall, the concerns were not as high then because during the Clinton administration, of course, we were creating over 3 million jobs per year on average. So that the private sector was humming along very well, created 22 million jobs during the Clinton administration, and unfortunately that was not the case in the last administration, nor has it yet been the case in this administration, although there were 2 million jobs, as the gentleman knows, created in the last 20 months. However, the last 2 months have been stagnant, and that's not good for anybody. It's not good for Republicans, Democrats, but more importantly, it's not good for the country. And therefore, I would urge us to make sure that we do not target a fund which has already demonstrably created jobs. I yield to my friend.
Let me, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, if I could respond to the gentleman. First of all, the gentleman knows good and well that the situation with the federal debt was entirely different back under the Clinton administration times.
Reclaiming my time, I do know that very, very well.
Right.
We had surpluses, not deficits. I yield back.
Well, and there was also a Republican Congress that was at work trying to help job creation then at that time as well. So if one wants to claim, we both can claim credit, but as the gentleman knows, I prefer to look forward to see if we can work together. So with that in mind, the gentleman of anyone in this body has been committed to try and take a fiscally responsible approach, and that's what we're trying to do here. And I would say to the gentleman, instead of just trying to claim numbers as if there is some panacea going on here, and as if the move to offset using funds obligated for this program would somehow threaten job creation, if you look at the numbers, this year all that has been allocated from the available $4 billion is $780 million. That's all that's been allocated and approved under this program. Again, remember, the money's been laying around since September 30th of 2008. That's 3 years. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman claims there's 33,000 jobs that were actually created by this program, but many would say that these jobs already existed at existing Ford Motor Company plants. And the administration, I know, has claimed that these jobs have been saved when there's no indication that in reality that is the case. So again, instead of trying to make all these claims and try and continue to make promises that frankly can't be substantiated, what we're trying to do is do what every family's got to do around its table, around every small business person's got to do at the end of each pay period, figure out how they're going to make it through the end of the month. And just as if a family was facing a situation where they had saved $25,000, $30,000, and they wanted to use that money to buy a new car, and God forbid somebody got very sick that needed that money in their family, most families are going to take that money and decide not to use the new car and instead buy the new car and instead help the family member who needs it. That's what we're trying to do here, Mr. Speaker. We're not trying to suggest that perhaps there isn't some laudable intent under this program. What we've identified is monies unspent that have been obligated, monies that apparently do not go out as quickly as the gentleman may suggest to, as he says and claims, create jobs, and take that money and prioritize it by saying it belongs to help the people in a disaster so they can get the relief they need. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that response. We could go back and forth on how many jobs were in fact created. My belief is that there were substantial numbers of jobs created by this fund, and the prospect of those 50,000 or 60,000 jobs is real, not ephemeral, not just a debating point. But I would say to my friend that my friend has been recently quoted, I'm sure accurately, perhaps if, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in saying that during the first 8 months we focused on cuts of our cut and grow, and now we need to focus on grow. I would tell my friend, assuming that quote is accurate, that in fact here we are again focused on cut, not on grow. Clearly, whatever the specific number is, I think that is, frankly, not refutable, that the investment in advanced manufacturing technology vehicles is, in fact, going to make us more competitive globally, going to enhance the ability to make it in America, not only succeed in America, but to make it, in this case, advanced vehicles which are competitive in the international markets. This is a specific area where we have tried to invest in making sure that we make it, in this case, advanced technology vehicles. And I don't believe that the public, and I don't think it's good policy for us to be focused on cutting back on those areas which have the promise of growth and jobs. That is what I tell my friend. Obviously, the gentleman is correct, but I want to tell the gentleman also that if you keep cutting revenues, as we did in 01 and 03, and then you keep escalating spending, as we did over the last 10 years, inevitably you're going to get to a point where that family is not going to have any revenues to pay its bills, as the gentleman points out. But it's inevitable that when you continue to cut revenues, and if you don't cut spending, you're going to be in trouble. That didn't happen in the last decade. It didn't happen in the last administration. In fact, as you know, exactly the opposite happened. We escalated spending more than we did under the Clinton administration, and therefore we find ourselves in a hole. The economy went into the tank, and it's struggling. And I agree with you. It doesn't matter why it's struggling, who's to blame, it's struggling. And as a result, what the President has done is come before us and said, look, here's a jobs bill. We need to build jobs. The overwhelming majority, I'm not going to go through all the polling data. I'm sure my friend has seen it. There's just a recent CNN poll which shows that the public, by big numbers, wants us to focus on creating, building, expanding jobs. And very frankly, the public believes that you need to invest to do that by pretty good numbers. I'm for disciplining spending. I will vote to discipline spending. But I don't think that targeting job creation projects is the way to discipline it when Americans all over this country are really hurting because there are not jobs available for them. I want to thank the gentleman for what I think are very measured and positive responses to the President's suggestion on how we create jobs in this country. I would ask the gentleman what plans the gentleman has and his party has to move forward on the legislation that the President has asked to create jobs, to invest in growing our economy, and to help those small businesses expand and create jobs, and to help those who do not have any job and who are worried about how to put food on their family's table, as well as investing in infrastructure and keeping teachers on the job. We think this legislation is critically important. We think the American people in the most recent CNN poll have responded very positively. They think this is a productive way to go forward. Can the gentleman tell me whether or not there are plans to have the committees move forward or for us to move forward on this legislation? And I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman, and the gentleman may have seen remarks that I made earlier in this week and the last week about the President's jobs plan. What I said is there's a lot of area I think that we can actually work together on. I do reject the President's demand for an all-or-nothing approach, that perhaps his way is the only way, because there are items in the President's plan that we take strong disagreement with. So I do think the American people do want us to try and drive towards results here, and I do think there are some areas we can work on together. We support the extension bonus depreciation. We support removing the pending application of the withholding on government contractors. We support facilitating and increasing small business access to capital. We support incentives to hire veterans. We support reforming the unemployment insurance system in this country, free trade agreements. We would love to entertain serious discussions on how you reform the system so that we can get a better return and improve infrastructure spending in this country. There are many areas, small business tax relief the President discussed. We have our own ideas. As the gentleman knows, the House is proceeding on our agenda for job creation. It's rolling back regulations that are impeding job growth, the one that was just passed prior to the session, the members leaving the chamber today. We will have one every week that we believe, after having consulted with small businesses around this country, are getting in the way of their jumping back in the game of job creation. So we all have ideas. It's not just the President's plan that will come up in this House. We are going to work together to find areas of agreement. And so I look forward to working with the gentleman to achieving that end so that, yes, the middle class in this country can get back to work as we see small businesses beginning to rev up again towards an economic recovery.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I also want to say that, yes, I have seen his comments. I thought they have been positive. I think the gentleman has just gone through a list of places where we could perhaps find common ground. What we need, of course, is a vehicle, hopefully on this floor in the very near future, in which to find common ground and also to offer alternatives that each of our parties or individuals in this House think will, in fact, grow the economy and create jobs. I think that would be very useful. The President indicated in his speech a sense of urgency that the American people feel. They gave us that message very loud and clear. I think all of us share that message. I think that to think about somebody being unemployed for 3 months or 6 months or 18 months or 2 years, not want to and have the ability to work and can't find a job is a crisis, is in fact a depression in that person's life, not only psychologically but actually. So that I would urge the gentleman to bring something to the floor as soon as possible that incorporates that on which we can agree and gives us an opportunity to offer solutions that perhaps the House will agree on. And if not, we won't agree. I also welcome the gentleman's rejection of the philosophy of my way or the highway. We welcome that recognition, that in fact we have to reach compromise if we're going to move this country forward. And if I might, in closing, let me perhaps ask you about the schedule longer term than next week. The members, obviously we have a special committee. I think the gentleman and I are both committed to, I know I am committed to the success of that committee. I think it's absolutely critical to give our business community confidence, to give our people confidence, and to give the international community confidence that this government can in fact work, can address very serious problems, in this case the debt and deficit, but also confront the problem of growing our economy, as both Bowles-Simpson Commission and the Rivlin-Domenici Commission said we ought to address both. That's what the jobs bill is about, and that's what the special committee is about. Does the gentleman have any thoughts in terms of the probability that the schedule that you have issued that indicates that we'll get out on December 8th? As we know, the committee has to be voted on by December 23rd. That does not mean we have to wait until the 23rd. Assuming the committee comes out with a positive report. Could you elaborate somewhat on what you see the schedule to be and the certainty with which members can plan
based upon the schedule that has been issued, given what faces us, and I yield to my friend.
Thank the gentleman, and I think as the gentleman knows, we've been really trying to stick to the schedule and to afford members some certainty so that they can schedule their business and their time with their constituents in their districts. And the hope is at this point for us to absolutely stick to the schedule. We at this point have no changes in the recess times, and as for whether we are going to go longer than December 8th, obviously the work of the Joint Select Committee bears greatly on that. As you know, as the Speaker, as the gentleman knows, the Joint Select Committee is expected to report by November 23rd. All goes well, we should be able to live up to the schedule as printed. Again, it will all depend on the work of the Joint Select Committee.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, thank him for his time today, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at noon on Monday next.
Without objection. So ordered. The chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to withdraw my name as co-sponsor of H.R. 1380.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank you. The chair will entertain 1-minute requests. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia rise?
Stand by remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, America has voted. The nation voted for a winning combination of humility, hard work, lifelong dream, and finely tuned talent. Today, I join with my friends and colleagues from Logan County, West Virginia, in congratulating Landau Eugene Murphy, Jr., this year's winner of NBC Television's America Got Talent. Landau's journey is a true American success story. Coming from humble beginnings, he worked hard, never lost faith in his Lord, and always remembered and determined to pursue his dreams. I believe that Landau accomplished last night what should stand as an example to every young person throughout this great nation. He has shown them that they should always set their goals high and work until they get there. And indeed, if you should take some blows, just let the record show you did it your way. I send my very best to Landau, his lovely wife Jennifer, and their family as they begin this new and exciting journey in their lives. I know that Landau remains as humble today as he was when he first took the stage at the Logan County Arts and Crafts Fair annual talent show some years ago. I commend the Logan County Chamber of Commerce, the Hatfield-McCoy Convention Visitors Bureau, and Diana Barnett and all the fine folks at the Mountain Place Cinema 8 in Logan, West Virginia, for their support of our hometown hero. As we've always done in West Virginia, we stand behind and support our own, and the work these organizations and individuals have done is phenomenal. Undoubtedly, their efforts were instrumental in Landau's victory. Mr. Murphy accepted his victory with the high fives of his competition, the hallmark of good sportsmanship. Throughout the weeks of competition, he often spoke of his respect, compassion, and friendship with his opponents, a timely lesson for us all. I hope my colleagues will congratulate all those whose talent carried them to the final weeks of long competition, and I thank America for recognizing a true talent in this fine son of West Virginia. Thankfully, we will be hearing a lot from him in the many years to come. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
I rise today to honor one of my fellow Marines and a truly brave and heroic American, Corporal Dakota Meyer. This week, Corporal Meyer is receiving the highest military honor our nation has to offer, the Congressional Medal of Honor. As a scout sniper with 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, Corporal Meyer ran through enemy fire multiple times in an attempt to save fellow U.S. service members in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. Facing enemy fire, Corporal Meyer killed at least 8 bad guys, personally evacuated 12 friendlies, and provided cover for another 24 of his fellow Marines and soldiers during a 6-hour battle. Corporal Meyer had no doubt distinguished himself above and beyond the call of duty and truly is an American hero. He knowingly risked his own life to save the lives of others. I congratulate him on this honor. Semper Fi, Corporal Meyer. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 17th of September in 1787, the United States Constitution was ratified, and Senator Byrd in the year 2005 introduced in the House's past Constitution Day. So this weekend we'll be celebrating Constitution Day, and when I think of the Constitution, I think of Dr. Martin Luther King and the right to peacefully assemble, which is enshrined in the First Amendment. That meant he could go to Selma, he could come to Washington and fight for civil rights and secure those rights for the people of this nation. I also think of women's rights embodied in the 19th Amendment, where women were given the right to vote, Tennessee being the perfect 36th state to give women that right to vote. I think of a woman's right to choose, which is given through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and the 9th Amendment, the 4th, and through the 1st and 3rds as well. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The Constitution embodies the fundamental values of this nation: freedom, fairness, justice, and equality. We haven't always lived up to the Constitution's ideals, but with the rights it guarantees and the freedoms it protects, we can continue to move forward and be the more perfect union that it promises. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Are there further one-minute requests? Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Webster of Florida for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. The Chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to 22 U.S.C. 276D in the order of the House of January 5, 2011, of the following members of the House to the Canada-United States Interparliamentary Group.
Mr. Dreyer of California, Mr. Lundgren of California, Mrs. Miller of Michigan, Mr. Smith of Nebraska, Mr. Huizenga of Michigan, Mr. Higgins of New York, Mr. Meeks of New York, Ms. Slaughter of New York, Mr. Welch of Vermont, and Mr. Larson of Washington.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
I thank the Speaker. Today I rise to honor the distinguished service of my good friend, His Excellency Yashar Aliyev, who in October 2006 was appointed by President Ilham Aliyev as Ambassador of the Republic of Azerbaijan to the United States of America. I'm proud to serve as the co-chairman of the Congressional Azerbaijan Caucus. Azerbaijan is an important strategic partner of the United States. Located in a geopolitically dynamic region between Europe and Asia and sandwiched between Russia and Iran, Azerbaijan is a secular country with a predominantly Muslim population that has been home for more than a millennia to vibrant Christian and Jewish communities. Azerbaijan has opened Caspian energy resources to the development of U.S. companies and has emerged as a key player for global energy security. On the security front, immediately after 9/11, Azerbaijan was among the first to offer strong support and assistance to the United States. Azerbaijan participated in operations in Kosovo and Iraq and is actively engaged in Afghanistan, having recently doubled its military presence there. Ambassador Aliyev has made an indelible mark on deepening U.S. and Azerbaijan relations. Bilateral trade is expanding as Azerbaijan diversifies its economy, enabling it to increasingly contribute to the economic growth of the United States. Baku and Washington cooperate on counterterrorism and non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Moreover, this continued development of Azerbaijan's natural resources contributes greatly to the energy security of the United States and Europe. In working with Ambassador Aliyev, we have more than doubled the size of the Azerbaijan caucus in Congress and continue to bring attention to this vital strategic partner. Prior to his appointment as ambassador, Aliyev served as Azerbaijan's permanent representative to the United Nations from 2002 to 2006. During this period, he was chairman of the 4th Committee of Special Political and Decolonization of the 60th UN General Assembly, vice president of the 59th General Assembly, vice president of the Economic and Social Council from 2004 and 5, and vice president of the UN Conference on Illicit Trade in Small Arms and Light Weapons in all its aspects in 2001. Ambassador Aliyev began his diplomatic career at the United Nations in 1992, serving as political affairs counselor and chargé d'affaires of Azerbaijan's permanent mission. He was also Azerbaijan's delegate to the First and Fourth Committees at the 47th through 56th sessions of the United Nations General Assembly. Having joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan in 1989, Ambassador Aliyev held the posts of political officer, first secretary, and deputy director in the ministry's Department of Information and Political Analysis, as well as director of Department of International Organizations. Ambassador Aliyev took up Oriental Studies at Azerbaijan State University in 1972 and received the school's highest degree in 1977. He pursued postgraduate research at Oriental Studies Institute of Russia's Academy of Sciences in Moscow from 1980 to 1982. And early in the 1990s, he was also studied for a year at the Diplomatic Academy of Russia's Foreign Ministry Affairs. He is fluent in English, Arabic, Russian, and Turkish. On a personal note, I will miss Ambassador Aliyev, and I extend to him my highest regards and well wishes to him and to his family in all their future endeavors. In our years working together, the ambassador has become truly a valued friend. It has been my pleasure to visit Azerbaijan twice with him, and also to host him in my district in Pennsylvania on 2 occasions, including sharing a recent birthday celebration together. Ambassador Aliyev, best wishes in all your future endeavors. I look forward to building on our strategic partnership with Azerbaijan and continuing our friendship into the years to come. I yield back the balance of my time to the Speaker.
Yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized for 55 minutes as the designated Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As the designee of the Majority Leader. Pardon me. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate the honor to be recognized to address you here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives for the minutes allocated. And I've enjoyed this privilege many times over the years, and I think this is the greatest deliberative body in the world, and sometimes we can do a little better than we actually do, but in the end, the voice of the American people does come here. And I look back on the intense debates that we had when we went through the throes of a national debate over one summer. It was cap and trade, or we called it cap and tax, the idea that we would limit American industry, chase American industry over to places like China and India, where they'd pump smoke up into the atmosphere and send us back goods that were built more cheaply than we would build them under American regulations here. That legislation did pass this House. It was killed in the Senate, but that consumed a summer. And the next summer, we had the debate of Obamacare. And I could go into that quite deeply, Mr. Speaker, but I will say that it was an intense debate that took place on the floor of the House of Representatives, on the floor of the Senate, and the floor of almost every home in the United States of America, in the streets of America, and in the grounds surrounding the Capitol, and in, of course, all the office buildings and around the Capitol. And for the first time that I know of in history, a member of Congress called people from all 50 states to come here to petition the government for redress of grievances, peaceably petition the government for redress of grievances. That was the plea of the American people. 40,000 to 60,000 people surrounded this Capitol in November, on a Thursday in November, November 5th of that year. And later on in the spring, they came back again and again. For the first time in history, the entire Capitol grounds were surrounded by people, not just a human chain touching their fingertips or holding hands all the way around, but a human donut, 6 and 8 deep everywhere, with thousands of people standing in the curves in the corners that came here to say to the people that were duly elected representatives of the American people here in this Congress, keep your hands off of my health care. We don't want Obamacare. That message echoed in this building. And on that night that Obamacare was poised for passage, the people doing business up here in the Rules Committee couldn't do business for a time because the echo in the windows from the people outside was so great that they couldn't have a conversation to be able to actually conduct the business of passing a rule that would brought Obamacare here to the floor. And there was hokum involved in the process, and even down to the point of circumventing the filibuster in the Senate and going through a reconciliation package and passing legislation on the promise that other legislation would be passed, and passing legislation on the promise that the President would issue an executive order to, get this, Mr. Speaker, amend the legislation that was on the floor. That's how bizarre this process became. And for a couple of years, a member of Congress didn't have an ability to bring an amendment to the floor to even force a debate or a vote trying to perfect legislation. That's how far the wheels came off of this Congress. The American people were delivered something that they had resoundingly rejected. That was Obamacare. And the aftermath of those shenanigans that took place that consumed the summer and the fall and the next spring and longer, the American people went to the polls the following November, and they sent 87 new freshman Republicans here to Congress in exactly the fashion that the Founding Fathers imagined. And that fashion was to have the House of Representatives, with elections every 2 years, be the quick reaction force that in the period of 2 years, in that time, history didn't turn as fast as it does today, but it's still, I think, soon enough to bring people here to start to reverse the mistakes that are made by the previous Congress. Now, we're not in a position to undo some of those bad things that have come upon this Congress right now. I thought we had that leverage a couple of times already in this Congress. Those moments have passed. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that now, if we can find and create that opportunity, I'm all for it. And I'm looking for somebody to lead us into a way that we can undo some bad legislation. But where we are today in this deliberative body is that we put the brakes on most bad things that have been happening here in this Congress, and we're laying the groundwork to call in the reinforcement within the vision of the Founding Fathers so that we can undo the bad things, and it's going to take some help in the United States Senate and in the White House. So here's America, and as we had a conversation here on the side earlier, there was a couple of years ago, I would say now, a serious discussion about whether I would go back to Iowa and run for governor. And the questions that I had, Mr. Speaker, in front of me were this, that we were looking at what turned out to be the Dodd-Frank bill, the financial regulation bill. We were looking at cap and trade, or cap and tax, which is a more accurate way to describe it. We were looking at Obamacare. And I'm thinking I would have to spend 14 months back in Iowa campaigning for that job. And if I carried my luggage into the governor's mansion and looked out the window onto an America that had been saddled with this burden, the burden of Dodd-Frank, the burden of Obamacare, and the burden perhaps of a cap and tax piece of legislation, it would be impossible to undo, and it would be impossible to fix America from a state office as such as I have mentioned. Those things weighed heavily on me. Today, here's where we are. This process has moved forward. Cap and tax has been essentially killed, temporarily killed, I will say, in the United States Senate, thanks to the filibuster and thanks to the work of the people on that side. It did pass through this House under the Pelosi speakership. Obamacare is now the law of the land, but it is repealable, Mr. Speaker, and that gives me great hope. And Dodd-Frank also is repealable. And so when I look at the presidential candidates who also are poised, seeking the nomination to challenge the White House, the senators that I'm convinced will come into the United States Senate, the new blood that will come into the House of Representatives with even deeper convictions on Constitution and constitutional conservatism, the idea across America is this. Government has mismanaged so much of what's come out of this federal government. They want a smaller, more responsive federal government. They want a government that does less with less, a government that balances the budget, and they want to have their freedom back. The American people want to have their liberty back, Mr. Speaker. And I would ask this question, and it's this, that Ronald Reagan asked in 1980, he said, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" And the American people answered with a resounding no, and they voted no on Jimmy Carter, yes on Ronald Reagan, and we got the greatest president of the century. who served 2 terms and put us back on track and got us believing in ourselves again. Today, and throughout this 14 months or so until the next election, we have to be asking not the question of, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Not a lot of people can say that they are. But the question really is, Mr. Speaker, are you more free today? Do you have more liberty today than you had 4 years ago? Do you and your children and your grandchildren have more potential to enjoy the fruits of their labor? Does this society, is it more open to success? And is America moving along and continuing to be the dominant economic force in the world, the dominant cultural force in the world, the dominant foundation for Western civilization? Are we going to continue to be that? Or are we going to watch the continuum of this history wind its way down? And will we trail in the dust the golden hopes of all humanity? Is that the future for this country? Now, there's not an image that I can see that the President has laid out for us on a direction on where we can go. I've watched what he's done. I think I know what he believes in. I'm looking him in the eye when he's told me what he believes in. And one of those things is Keynesian economics. The President told a group of us in February 10th of 2009, to be precise, that Keynesian economic works. He said to us that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal actually did work, but that Roosevelt lost his nerve and he pulled back in the second half of the 30s when he should have been borrowing and spending more money. And because he pulled back, according to the President, it brought about a recession within a depression, unemployment went up, and then along came World War II, the greatest economic stimulus plan ever. That was a little classroom lecture that, well, it was a statement, not necessarily a lecture, to be fair, Mr. Speaker. But that was the President's position on that day, and I'm sure that that's something that he's held for a long time. He didn't make it up while he was standing there. It came out of him as a conviction. That's how it sounded to me. I'm of the exact opposite conviction, Mr. Speaker. I'm of this conviction that Keynesian economics always was a mistake. Oh, and for the record, John Maynard Keynes was the most influential economist of his time, and he came to prominence in the 20s and then even more prominence in the 30s as he proposed that the federal government should get money into the hands of people so that people could spend the money, and if they spent the money, it would stimulate the economy. That's the Keynesian approach. And even though he said this facetiously, I believe that it illustrates the Keynesian economic theory, this narrative. And this is a narrative told by John Maynard Keynes himself. He said, I can solve all the unemployment in the United States of America, and here's how I would do it. Just give me an abandoned coal mine, and I'll go out into that coal mine. He'd send other people, actually, and with drilling rigs, and they will drill holes down all over the coal mine. And then we'll stuff them full of cash, and then we'll fill the cold coal mine up with garbage and heap it full of garbage, and then turn the entrepreneurs loose, which would then solve all the unemployment in America. Now, just to flesh that out a little bit, Mr. Speaker, you turn the entrepreneurs loose on an old coal mine that's full of garbage and has holes drilled with cash in it. They've got to go in and move the garbage off. They've got to locate the holes. They've got to clean out the holes. They've got to get down to the cash. And doing all of that will require somebody to rehandle the garbage again, somebody to set up the showers, somebody to take care of the medical needs and the food needs, and after a while the banking needs when they start to come up with the cash. You see how he understood how the economy goes when you get money flowing in the economy, how that actually happens. But what Keynes missed was, where was the cash going to come from in the first place? You can't go out and borrow money and bury it and have people dig it up and think you're doing something productive. That's the equivalent of paying each other to do each other's laundry. You produce nothing extra from it. You just trade dollars. What has built America? The strength of this country economically has been free market capitalism, competition. And because of the competition, we have had inventors and entrepreneurs, and we have had more patents, trademarks, and copyrights per capita, at least, than any other country in the world. And the reason for that is because Americans are natural entrepreneurs, we're natural creators, and we have the resources to do it. And I don't just mean gold and oil and I always have to put corn in there as a natural resource, Mr. Speaker. I know you use it for grits, but for us, we feed most of it to livestock and turn some of it into ethanol. But all of those resources that we have in this country, Americans have developed them, we've grown them, we've mined them out of the earth, we've turned our timber into valuable products, we cut trees and turned them into ships, and we traded around the world. And we did that early in this country. American clipper ships were the class of the world. And we have done this success because we produced goods and services that had a marketable value both domestically and abroad. That is still what will bring America out of the economic doldrums, producing goods and services that have a marketable value both domestically and abroad. Not spending money, not the little sugar high of handing somebody money and saying, here are your food stamps, here's your unemployment check, do nothing, except go out and spend the money. That is only, at best, a sugar high. And for the economy, it's temporary. Even if Keynes was right on any part of it, it would be this. Dump in billions, hundreds of billions, and in the case of the President of the United States, we're talking trillions of dollars dumped into this economy. The best you can hope for with a Keynesian economist on steroids, which is our President, is this, that he might have diminished the depths to which we otherwise could have fallen to some degree. We will never know how much. But what I guarantee you is the depths that might have been diminished, certainly the breadth of this trough of the economic downward decline that we're in is much broader. And it's going to take us a long, long time to recover. And a way to explain that, Mr. Speaker, is this, that if you are a small business, a large business, or a government, and if you go out and borrow too much money, and you have a revenue stream coming in, and now that you have to service the debt, you have to pay the interest and the principal on the debt, the banker's in there, he's going to collect his money. So you have a fixed income, and you borrowed more money, which means more interest has to go, and it has to also pay off the principal, or you can never stop the drain, and then it weighs you down. There are businesses, I'll just actually say many of them in my business, that have actually literally, not figuratively, and not virtually, but literally been underwater for all summer long in the floods in the Missouri River. And if all they have for relief is a small business disaster loan, and they can get a preferential interest rate of maybe some number approaching 4% interest, still, if they get stacked with too much debt, they can't have the income to service that debt. Same with the country. The United States of America borrows money and hands it to people and tells them, you don't have to work for this, you don't have to produce anything for this, we just want you to spend it. That's your patriotic duty, to take the money that we borrowed from the Chinese and the debt burden we put on our grandchildren and put it into people's hands and say, it's a patriotic thing, take your food stamps and take your rent subsidy and your heat subsidy and your unemployment check and go engage in commerce. That's patriotic. No. What's patriotic is carry your own weight. I mean, John Smith said clear back then in the 1600s, no work, no eat. That also is part of the New Testament, where he lifted that from, I believe, was in Galatians. He who would not work would also not eat. And that doesn't mean we don't want to take care of people that can't help themselves, but people that can help themselves need to help themselves and all of the rest of us. We're hearing the statements come out of people that generally sit over on this side of the floor, Mr. Speaker, this belief that economic stimulus, the former Speaker of the House, Speaker Pelosi, has consistently said that unemployment checks are one of those reliable and immediate forms of economic recovery. That you get a lot of bang for your buck when you pay people not to work, and they will go out and spend that money immediately. Therefore, we should pass out unemployment checks and stimulate the economy. That statement is ridiculous where I come from, Mr. Speaker. To pay people not to work, and somehow in that formula it stimulates the economy. And another statement came from our Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, who is consistently, at least it shows up in the media hits consistently, has said that food stamps are also an economic stimulator. That you get, for every dollar in food stamps that you hand out, you get $1.84 in economic activity. Well, that may be. But if you had somebody actually producing something in exchange for that food stamp, you would have the economy growing, you'd be building capital within your economy. We have this massive amount of capital here in the United States of America, and it's built within, it's part of it's cash, part of it is the real estate value that's been improved by putting buildings and fixtures out, part of it's equipment that we've manufactured, and it's the utilization of that. All of that's part of the capital base of America. Our knowledge base is part of the capital base in America. And here we have the federal government and the President's proposal with his jobs plan, by the way, continuing to wanting to extend unemployment benefits another year, believing that that's an economic stimulus plan. Now, if I were a younger man, or let's just say a boy who was looking at this economy from the simplistic way of what pays and what doesn't, and if someone had said to me when I was, say, 16 years old, well, here's how we stimulate the economy, we're going to hand out unemployment checks and food stamps. That's what we're hearing, Mr. Speaker. We're hearing this out of the people that speak for the White House, handing out unemployment checks and handing out food stamps as an economic stimulus plan. Now, I'm back to produce goods and services that have a marketable value, both here and abroad. And when I say that, that means we have to compete with the value, the prices of those goods that other countries can produce so that we have an opportunity to outsell them when they want to sell here, and we have an opportunity to outsell them in their countries. We have to be better at some of those things. But this economy will not recover if we're going to continue to borrow money, put the debt on the heads of our grandchildren, and think that spending money solves anything. I have a little granddaughter that's closing in on a year old now, and she's just taken her first steps, about 10 or 12 of them last night, as a matter of fact, and her name is Reagan Ann King. When she was born into this world, her share of the national debt, what she owes to Uncle Sam when she took her first breath as a new American citizen and a miracle from God, was $44,000, her share of the debt. And we worry about a college student that has a degree with a $40,000 student loan to pay off. I'll submit, Mr. Speaker, they at least have a diploma in a likely case. They have an education in every case and an opportunity to earn that back. And from the time they leave college and the toll starts to ring on their student loan, they have an opportunity to go to work and to stop the interest and pay the interest and start to pay the principal on their student loan. But this little girl, Reagan Ann King, that's just taken her first dozen steps last night, this little girl doesn't have a chance to start earning that back. Her $44,000 worth of debt is accumulating interest every day of her little life till she's turned around a year old, till she's 10, till she's 20, till she gets an education that's good enough for her to start actually earning her share and paying taxes and starting to pay down this national debt. How much is that $44,000 going to be before she gets a chance to stop the bleeding just for her? Well, by the time she's 10 and starts 5th grade, it'll be not $44,000 but $88,000. That's an actual calculation rounded to the nearest thousand. It's not just 44 times 2. $88,000. Welcome to 5th grade, Reagan Ann King. Now your share of the national debt's $88,000. How does that make you feel? Study hard. I will give you another Republican approach here, Mr. Speaker, that I think illustrates the right attitude, and it caught me a little off guard. Conversation with my oldest son and his little 6-year-old daughter, who was telling me that her favorite subject is math. And our family's in the construction business, and we do a lot of work that requires engineering. And so I immediately said to her, study hard, focus on your math. That means if you're good at math, you can be an engineer, and your daddy needs an engineer in the company. And her daddy said immediately, I don't need another mouth to feed. She can study hard and carry her own weight and make a living in the world. Now think about the difference in that. Rather than opening up the door saying, study hard, become an engineer, I can use one in the company, which I think he could, he said she can make her own way. The attitude when you're 6 years old growing on up that you're going to go out into the world and make your own way. Even though there's by then maybe a 3rd-generation company, it surprised me that he saw the world so clearly and instantly directed his child that stand on your own.